My mom recently separated from my dad. It was a tough time for all of us, but she seemed to find new meaning in life. She met Andrew, and they married fairly quickly. He was nothing like my dad, calmer, more patient, and genuinely seemed to care about her. We all moved into a new house, and I stayed living with them as before. Though I was already an adult, I had neither the desire nor the means to move out, and my mom wanted me close by. I was looking for my mom when I accidentally saw Andrew in the backyard. He was in sports clothes, dark blue shorts and a t-shirt. He was preparing something, and judging by his smile, it was clear it was a surprise for my mom. He didn't look like I was used to seeing him. Usually he was reserved, dressed in a suit. But now, with a relaxed smile and his focus on the ribbons, he seemed different, more open. I stopped, hesitating to come closer. For some reason, seeing him like this made me feel strange, as if I was intruding on something personal. He looked almost vulnerable, a side of him I had never seen before. And at the same time, something inside me stirred, either from embarrassment or from some kind of unclear attraction. "Oh, Caitlin, you're here already?" Andrew looked up, smiling at me as he paused what he was doing. "Can you help me with this?" I nodded nervously and stepped closer. He handed me a few ribbons and our hands brushed together. I felt a slight jolt run through me, unexpected and strange enough that I held my breath. But Andrew didn't seem to notice. He just kept working as if nothing had happened. I went back inside, trying to pull myself together. Justin, my boyfriend, was sitting in the living room at his computer, barely noticing me. We'd been together for years, and our relationship had settled into a predictable stability that I once appreciated. But in recent months, I had often felt like something was missing. Maybe it was romance or just the attention I so badly craved. Justin seemed absorbed in his own world, and our conversations had become mundane. And today, in the backyard, that simple touch from Andrew seemed to awaken me. It reminded me that I could still feel, that something deep inside me was still alive. It was so strange that I tried to convince myself it was just a moment of weakness, nothing more. But no matter how hard I tried, something had changed, and I couldn't ignore it. Justin and I sometimes argued, but lately it had been happening more and more often. Another argument left me completely drained. It seemed like all our conversations kept circling back to the same issue, his endless preoccupation and my sense of loneliness. I closed the bedroom door behind me, trying to calm down, but the tears kept flowing, and there was a hollow, heavy pressure in my chest. At times like these, I just wanted to run away to a place where no one would judge me, where I could just be myself. I tiptoed downstairs and saw the light in the living room. Andrew was sitting on the couch, a book in his hands, looking relaxed. I hesitated before stepping in. I didn't want to disturb him, but when he looked up and gave me a gentle smile, I couldn't turn away. "Is everything okay, Caitlin?" he asked, putting the book aside. His voice was warm and sincere. "Not really," I admitted, sitting down on the edge of the couch. "We argued again. It's just becoming unbearable." Andrew looked at me with understanding, his eyes showing neither judgment nor pity, just quiet empathy. He sighed as if weighing what to say, and began to talk about his past marriage, about how he too had moments when he felt misunderstood. "You know, sometimes we think love is always easy," he said. "But it's far from that. I once thought it was enough just to be there for everything to be okay. But I realized it takes more. You have to truly listen, to feel the other person." His words hit the mark, touching those strings inside me that I had tried to suppress. He wasn't my father, but at that moment, I wished for someone who could understand and support me. And Andrew understood. He didn't speak ill of Justin or give me advice. He just shared his feelings, and that was exactly what I needed. When he hugged me, it felt so natural, as if he was trying to protect me from all the pain that had accumulated inside. He hugged me like his daughter, and I allowed myself to relax in his embrace for a moment. I felt his warmth, his steadiness, and something in me responded to it. My pulse quickened, and I involuntarily felt my body react to his touch. It was wrong, and I knew it, but I couldn't help it. I closed my eyes, trying just to breathe evenly, not to reveal my feelings. But this moment, this embrace felt like something more than just comfort. It was a moment when boundaries blurred, when I felt his presence not as a stepfather but as a man who was there to support me. The next day, I decided to distract myself from my fights with Justin. The weather was nice, the sun was shining, and I realized that keeping myself busy with something practical would help me regain my inner balance. My dad had once given me a car, and it was very dear to me. It wasn't in the best condition, but that was part of its charm. Tinkering with it, fixing it. It gave me a strange sense of calm, as if I was regaining control over something in my life. I was standing by the hood, fiddling with the engine, when I heard footsteps. Andrew came out of the house, curiosity in his eyes as he approached. "Back to working on this baby again?" he asked, smiling slightly. "Need a hand?" "Maybe," I replied, shrugging, trying not to look too eager. "Sometimes it feels like it's falling apart." Andrew chuckled and stepped closer, looking under the hood. I caught myself watching his hands, strong, confident, moving with precision. He was so close that I could smell him. A mix of soap and something else, something warm and steady. I tried to focus on the engine, but I noticed our eyes meeting occasionally, and there was this light, almost playful spark between us. "You know," he said, turning a bolt, "this car seems to have become a family project. Your dad would probably be proud of you." I smiled, feeling something warm unfold inside me. His words were simple, yet they meant a lot to me. Andrew looked at me with a soft smile, and suddenly I realized that something new was happening between us. It wasn't just a moment of helping each other. It was a deeper connection that I couldn't ignore. We finished the repair when I heard someone call my name. I turned and saw Justin standing at the gate, watching us. His face was closed off as if he was trying to hide what he was feeling at that moment. "Caitlin," he said, coming closer. "I came to apologize for yesterday. I probably overreacted." I felt tension rise within me. My feelings for Justin had become tangled. I knew I should be happy about his attempt to make up, but something about his presence felt out of place, as if his arrival had shattered something important between Andrew and me. I felt Justin's gaze on both of us, and I noticed his eyes linger on Andrew. Suspicion mixed with jealousy flickered in his eyes. "It's okay," I said, trying to smile. "Just working on the car?" Justin nodded, but I could see what he felt. He suspected something. It made me think about why I felt this way with Andrew. Why did every word he said and every look he gave me evoke a response I couldn't ignore? I tried to hide it, but I knew that it would be hard not to notice what was happening inside me from now on. Justin stood in front of me, his brows furrowed, his gaze cold. His distrust was evident. He couldn't understand what was happening between Andrew and me. I tried to calm him down, to explain that everything was innocent, but he wasn't listening. His voice began to rise, and the tension was palpable. "You're not even trying to understand me," Justin shouted, his voice growing louder. "You're here with him, with your stepfather, and I see the way you look at him." "Stop it, Justin, you're acting irrational," I said, feeling my cheeks burn. His accusations were unfair, and his aggressive tone started to frighten me. "You act like I owe you something." I tried to walk away, but Justin grabbed my arm roughly, not letting me go. His eyes were burning, and I felt the situation was spiraling out of control. At that moment, I heard a familiar voice. "Let her go, Justin," Andrew said, his voice steady and firm. He stood nearby, his expression resolute. "This is none of your business." Justin gritted his teeth, but his grip loosened. "I think it's very much my business when someone treats Caitlin like this," Andrew replied, his words so calm that it made everything inside me tremble. Justin let go of me, his eyes darting between us. I could see him hesitating, his eyes filled with anger and hurt. He turned and walked away, leaving Andrew and me standing there, unsure of what to say. In that moment, I felt incredibly vulnerable. All I wanted was to be close to someone who understood me, who didn't accuse or yell. Andrew stepped closer, his hand gently touching my shoulder. "Are you okay?" he asked quietly, his eyes filled with the same care as before. I nodded, but my eyes were full of tears. The world around me seemed to shrink, leaving only the two of us. I looked at Andrew, and before I could even think about what I was doing, I stepped toward him, and driven by emotion, pressed my lips to his. It was like an explosion of feelings I could no longer contain. He froze for a moment. Then his arms slowly wrapped around me, and I felt his lips begin to respond to my kiss. It was a moment where the entire world disappeared. Inside me, everything was a whirlwind: fear, embarrassment, passion. We both knew it was wrong, that we had crossed a line that shouldn't be crossed, but at that moment, neither of us could find the words to stop it. When the kiss finally ended, I pulled away, trying to catch my breath. We both looked at each other, stunned and a bit scared. It was as if we simultaneously realized that something had happened that could never be undone. Andrew looked away, as if trying to find the right words, but neither of us said anything. We just stood there, knowing that from this moment on, everything had changed. Sarah decided to organize a trip out of town to spend some time together as a family and strengthen our bonds. She chose a cozy spot by a lake, a place where we could escape the hustle and bustle of the city and just be together. The weather was perfect, clear skies and a light breeze. Everyone was looking forward to the day, but deep down, I felt a certain tension. After the kiss with Andrew, I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened between us. We got in the car, and the drive took a couple of hours. The day went by quite peacefully: barbecues, conversations, and laughter. But every time our eyes met, there was something unspoken between Andrew and me, something that made my heart beat faster. His casual touches, when he helped me out of the boat and brushed my hand, or when he handed me a glass of water, his fingers brushing mine, each small gesture seemed to carry deep meaning. On the way back, it had already gotten dark. We were all tired and settled into the car wherever it was most comfortable. Sarah sat in the front seat next to the driver, and I ended up in the back seat with Andrew. I tried not to look at him, but I felt his presence, his warmth beside me. The silence in the car, broken only by the hum of the engine, created an almost intimate atmosphere. The light from passing cars softly illuminated his face, and I could see him occasionally glancing at me. At some point, I felt his hand slowly rest on my knee. My heart skipped a beat and then began pounding so hard that it felt like the entire car could hear it. I didn't know how to react, but I didn't pull away. His fingers gently squeezed my knee, and a warm current spread through my body. It was like an unspoken question, and I already knew the answer. I looked up, and our eyes met. And in that look, there was everything: doubt, fear, and something deeper that we were both afraid to acknowledge. His hand remained on my knee, and I felt my own fingers slowly reaching for his hand, gently touching it. We sat like that for several minutes as the car drove down the dark road. It was like the beginning of something inevitable, something that could no longer be stopped. Sarah, in the front seat, was chatting with the driver, laughing, unaware of what was happening behind her. It added an edge to the moment, and inside I was trembling from this mix of fear and desire. Andrew slightly moved his hand up my thigh, and I realized that the boundary we had crossed that day was once again becoming blurred. These touches were the beginning of our physical closeness, something that now seemed inevitable. We didn't say a word, but in that silence there was more meaning than in any conversation. After the trip out of town, I realized I needed to try and bring my life back to normal. Everything that had happened between Andrew and me felt so unreal, like it was a dream that I had finally woken up from. I knew I had to take a step back, to retreat from the line we had crossed more than once. I decided to try to rebuild my relationship with Justin. When I called him and suggested we meet, he seemed happy. We agreed to spend the evening together like we used to, when our relationship felt easy and natural. He brought me flowers, and I felt a wave of tenderness. This was the Justin I once loved. But when he touched me, when he kissed me, all I felt was just an echo of what we once had. His touch felt familiar, but it didn't excite me. I closed my eyes, trying to feel more, but instead, Andrew's image appeared, his gaze, his hands, the way he touched me. We spent the evening together, but the passion I tried to summon within myself felt forced. I realized that my relationship with Justin was like this evening. It was comfortable, calm, but lacked the spark that made me feel alive. The next day, I noticed that Sarah had started watching Andrew and me more closely. She noticed that we often ended up together, talking longer than necessary. I saw how her gaze sometimes lingered on us, but she didn't seem to think much of it. She trusted both of us, and that trust made me feel even more guilty. I tried to avoid being alone with Andrew, but it felt like something kept pulling us together, like a magnet. Late in the evening, as I was getting ready for bed, my phone buzzed on the nightstand, a message from Andrew. My heart tightened and I felt my hands tremble as I unlocked the screen. "I can't stop thinking about you. It's wrong, but I can't help myself." I read those words over and over, feeling a wave of emotions rise within me. Everything I had tried to hide, to forget, resurfaced again. His confession was so simple and honest that I couldn't ignore it. I knew this was wrong, knew we shouldn't go any further. But his words, his feelings, were what made me feel alive. It was what I missed so much in my relationship with Justin. I put the phone back on the nightstand, closed my eyes, and tried to sleep. But thoughts of Andrew wouldn't leave me. Our touches, his gaze, how he held my hand in the car. All of it was too vivid to forget. I went to the store just to pick up some groceries, trying to distract myself from everything that was going on. I walked between the aisles, putting the necessary items into my basket when I heard a familiar voice. "Caitlin?" Andrew's voice was unexpectedly close. I turned around and saw him. He was standing just a few steps away, holding a basket, an expression of surprise and a smile on his face. Something inside me stirred, and I felt my heart start to beat faster. We exchanged a few words and it all seemed normal, but there was still something between us that wouldn't let me forget what had happened. "Maybe we could grab a coffee?" he suggested, and I couldn't say no. The words "just coffee" sounded innocent, but I knew it would be more than just a cup. We found a small cafe nearby and sat by a window. I tried to act as usual, but the tension between us hung in the air, making every moment feel significant. We talked about trivial things, work, weekend plans, but it all felt like a facade, hiding our real emotions. At some point, Andrew leaned in towards me, his hand rising to brush something off my cheek. His fingers touched my skin for just a moment, and I froze. That touch was so gentle and so unexpected that it brought a pause between us. I looked up and met his gaze. There was something in his eyes that I couldn't ignore. Time seemed to stop, and all the sounds around us disappeared. I felt the spark between us again, the one I had been trying to ignore, but it just wouldn't fade. Andrew pulled back, his hand dropping, and he smiled slightly as if nothing had happened. But for me, it was more than just a caring gesture. I felt something click inside me. It was like I was standing at the edge again, ready to step over. When I got home, Justin was already there. He looked at me and I felt his gaze burning right through me. He could sense that I was pulling away again. He tried to act like everything was normal, but I could see his tension, his uncertainty. I tried to smile at him, to say something about the groceries, but even my own words felt insincere. Justin walked up to me and hugged me, but his embrace felt foreign, as if he was trying to hold on to something slipping away. I closed my eyes, feeling everything inside me swirling together. All my attempts to return to normal life were falling apart, and I didn't know how to stop it. That same evening, Sarah suggested we go to a business conference to help Andrew prepare some materials. It was a chance for both of them to work together, but I knew it also meant more time spent with him. I tried not to show my inner anxiety and agreed to go with them. The three of us went to the conference, and after the work was done, we stayed overnight at a hotel. The hotel was quite comfortable, with small rooms and cozy lounges. When we arrived, Sarah went off to meet some colleagues. She got delayed by work issues, and she asked Andrew and me to finish preparing the presentation. Left alone in the hotel room, I felt the tension inside me growing. It seemed like every look we exchanged, every word we spoke, was filled with hidden meaning. We sat down at the table, started discussing the materials, but the room was filled with an impenetrable silence, as if everything that had happened between us was just the beginning. At some point, I noticed his gaze linger on me a bit longer than usual. I tried to focus on the papers, but I felt a wave of heat rising inside me. My heart beat faster and the room felt too small. I looked up and met his eyes. There was the same mixture of desire and doubt that tormented me. For a moment, everything stopped, and as if by some unspoken signal, I stood and took a step towards him. Andrew stood too, his eyes never leaving mine. His hand reached out and I felt his fingers brush against my cheek, gently caressing it. That gesture was so tender and warm that I just couldn't stop myself. Our faces were close, and when he leaned in to kiss me, I didn't pull away. Our lips met, and the kiss felt like an answer to all those questions we were too afraid to ask. I felt his arms wrap around me, pulling me closer, and my body responded to his touch. Everything happened too quickly, but at the same time, it felt like each second lasted an eternity. It was so wrong, but so necessary. Passion overwhelmed us both, and at that moment, the entire world disappeared. There was only us, our feelings, and this irresistible pull toward each other. When it was over, we sat next to each other, trying to catch our breath. The realization of what had happened hit me like a cold shower. I covered my face with my hands, feeling guilt and fear. We both knew it was unacceptable, that we had crossed a line we shouldn't have, but our attraction was too strong to resist. That night, I tried to convince myself it was a mistake. I lay in bed, closed my eyes, but thoughts of the kiss wouldn't leave me alone. Over and over, I replayed that moment, the warmth of his hands, his breath, his desire. It was all too vivid, too real. I knew it was wrong, but I couldn't make myself forget. Returning from the conference, I knew I had to change something. Everything that had happened with Andrew was too dangerous. I was risking not only my relationship, but also the family that my mother had built. With these thoughts, I decided I had to do everything possible to keep my world intact. The first step was making things right with Justin. I called him, and he happily agreed to meet. I prepared a romantic evening, set the table, and lit candles. I hoped that this evening would help us find again what I once cherished in our relationship. Justin arrived with a bouquet of flowers, and his smile was so genuine that it brought an ache to my chest. He was trying to bring back what we once had, and I knew I had to try for him, for us. We sat at the table, talked about future plans, and all the little things that used to fill our days. Everything seemed normal, and for a moment, I even believed that we could go back to the way things were. But when Justin came closer, when his arms wrapped around me, all I felt was emptiness. His touch didn't feel like what I needed. I tried to close my eyes, to let myself go, but instead, images of Andrew came to my mind. How he touched me, how his lips found mine. The passion between Andrew and me had now become the measure of all my feelings, and it scared me. Justin didn't notice my inner conflict. His touches were gentle, but I couldn't respond with the same passion. I realized I could no longer pretend that everything was okay. My soul was torn in two, and even all my efforts couldn't bring us back to the days when everything was simple. The next day, I decided to meet with Andrew to put an end to what was happening between us once and for all. I couldn't allow myself these feelings any longer, knowing what it could lead to. We agreed to meet in a park where we could talk freely, away from prying eyes. I looked him in the eyes and told him that it had been a mistake, that nothing like it should ever happen again. He nodded, but his gaze was filled with sadness, and I could see that it was as hard for him as it was for me. I tried to explain that I didn't want to destroy the family, that it was too painful for all of us. At that moment, I heard a familiar voice. "Caitlin?" Justin was standing next to us, his expression surprised. "I didn't expect to see you here." I turned to him, trying to hide my anxiety. He approached us, and I introduced Andrew as my stepfather, adding that we were just discussing some work-related matters. Justin didn't seem to suspect anything. He simply smiled and, taking my hand, suggested we go grab a coffee. I felt something break inside me. It was like a sign that I needed to continue on with Justin, that I had to do everything I could to forget about Andrew. But looking at Andrew, I knew it wouldn't be easy. His eyes, his gaze, they spoke the things we couldn't say out loud. After our meeting in the park, I tried to keep my distance. But the more I tried to pull away from Andrew, the more I felt the emptiness that filled my life. At night, I lay staring at the ceiling, feeling drawn to his words, his presence. And then, a few days later, I decided to write to him. Our messages began with the usual, "How are you?" or "Hope everything's okay." We wrote to each other late at night, when everything around was quiet and no one could interrupt us. It became our secret, a way to stay close without crossing the line we had set for ourselves. In those messages, we shared things we were afraid to say aloud, our thoughts, fears, desires. I knew it was wrong, that maybe we should have stopped communicating, but it was already impossible to stop. It was as if every response from him brought me closer to the feeling that was missing from my life. One evening, when Sarah was busy in the city, Andrew stayed at home, and I also happened to be there. We crossed paths in the living room. The room felt too small to contain our thoughts. The tension between us was so palpable that the air seemed to grow thick and heavy. We tried to talk about something mundane, but the conversation kept trailing off, leaving only silence. When Andrew stepped closer, I felt his hand on mine. His touch was gentle, but there was something more behind it. He slowly moved his hand to my face, and I could see him leaning in, trying to kiss me. My heart started pounding faster, but at the last moment, I turned away. "We agreed, Andrew," I whispered, trying to steady the trembling in my voice. "We can't do this anymore." He froze, his face just inches from mine. There was so much pain and understanding in his eyes that it took my breath away. He nodded without saying a word and stepped back. We both knew this was wrong, but something inside wouldn't let us stop, as if an invisible force bound us together, making it impossible to step away. During this time, Sarah began to notice changes. She saw that Andrew and I were too often alone together, that there was something new in our glances and words that hadn't been there before. I could see her eyes becoming more watchful, her gaze following us intently. She didn't say anything, but I could feel her trust gradually turning into suspicion. I knew that our attraction was becoming too obvious, that it was only a matter of time before the truth came out. We were standing at the edges of what was permissible, and each day that edge became less clear, and crossing it seemed inevitable. It was a morning that seemed as ordinary as any other, but I didn't know that this day would be the one where everything would collapse. Sarah, as usual, was getting ready for work, and I was planning my own day, trying to maintain an appearance of calm. Andrew was downstairs doing something in the living room when I suddenly heard my mother's sharp voice. "Andrew!" Sarah shouted. And there was something in her tone that I had never heard before, a mix of anger and disappointment. I froze on the stairs, feeling my heart start to pound. I went down, not knowing what to expect, and when I entered the living room, I saw her holding Andrew's phone. Sarah was standing in front of him, her eyes filled with fury. I immediately realized that she had found our messages. "What does this mean, Andrew?" Her voice shook, and she looked at him as if seeing him for the first time. "How do you explain this?" Andrew tried to step closer, his face full of confusion and worry. "Sarah, it's not what you think," he said, raising his hands as if trying to calm her down. "It's not like that." But Sarah cut him off, holding up the phone. "Not like that? Do you seriously think I don't understand what I'm reading here?" She read a part of one of our messages aloud, her voice cutting through the silence of the room. "I can't stop thinking about you. How can you explain this?" I felt my legs go weak. Everything that was happening felt like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. Sarah turned to me, her eyes meeting mine, and in them I saw everything. Pain, betrayal, disbelief. I knew there was no turning back. My mother knew the truth, and no excuse could change what had happened. "Caitlin, this is your account for chatting?" she asked, her voice trembling as if she couldn't believe what was happening. I opened my mouth, but the words caught in my throat. I couldn't look at her, couldn't find a single explanation that wouldn't sound pathetic and false. My whole life was falling apart at that moment. I saw Andrew trying to say something, his voice gentle, but Sarah didn't want to hear it. She was shouting, tears streaming down her face, and every word felt like a blow to my heart. "You were my husband!" she screamed, throwing the phone onto the table. "I trusted you, and you betrayed me. With Caitlin, my daughter." Those words cut deep. I felt tears welling up in my eyes, and I wanted to run away, to hide from this horror unfolding in front of me. But I knew it was too late. Everything had come out, and now there was no going back to the past. After what happened with my mother, I knew I couldn't hide the truth any longer. Lies had destroyed everything that mattered. Now, all I could do was confess to Justin. The thought hurt, and every part of me screamed that I should forget about it, that I could avoid this conversation, but deep down I knew nothing could be undone anymore. I called Justin and asked him to come over. When he walked into the house, I saw hope in his eyes, and that made it even more painful. We sat down in the living room and I began to speak. At first he listened, confused, but as the meaning of my words sank in, his face turned pale. "You cheated on me." "With Andrew?" His voice was barely audible, tinged with disbelief. "Yes," I replied, tears streaming down my cheeks. "I never wanted it to happen like this. It was a mistake, but I couldn't stop myself." His reaction was filled with rage and disappointment. Justin jumped up from the couch, his eyes darting around as if looking for something that could explain why I had done this. "You betrayed me, Caitlin," he shouted, his voice raw with pain. "How could you? I loved you. I trusted you." I listened to his shouting in silence, not trying to defend myself. I knew there were no excuses. I had betrayed his trust, and now my life was falling to pieces. The next day, another confrontation erupted in the house. My mother, Sarah, demanded that Andrew leave. His presence had become unbearable for her, and I understood why. She couldn't look at him and see what he had done to her family. Andrew packed his things and left. His eyes met mine one last time, filled with pain and regret. But I knew he was leaving me alone with the consequences of our actions. My mother couldn't find it in herself to forgive me. In her eyes, I saw only pain and cold detachment. She told me she couldn't and didn't want to forgive me. She didn't shout or accuse me. Her silence was the worst reproach of all. "I don't know who you are anymore, Caitlin," she said, her voice steady, but I felt each word cutting me to the core. "You destroyed our family, and I don't know if I can ever forget that." With those words, she left me alone. I stayed in our house, but I felt like a stranger. The rooms that were once filled with warmth now seemed empty and cold. My world had collapsed, and I understood that all of this was the consequence of my choices, my weakness. I was in complete isolation, and no one could save me from the pain I had created myself. Loneliness became my only companion. In the empty house, there was no sound, just my own thoughts, which were unbearable. I was left alone with what I had done, and now I had to live with it every day. Every corner of the room reminded me of a time when things were different, when laughter echoed through the house and there was trust and love between us. I felt broken. My life was shattered, and every day I woke up with a heaviness that was hard to bear. But I knew I couldn't keep hiding. I had to find a way to face what I had done. I realized that my first attempt should be to restore some sort of contact with my mother. I wrote her a letter. It was harder than I expected. The words felt empty, all the excuses sounded pathetic, but I knew I had to try. I tried to explain my feelings, to tell her how lost I had been, how I was searching for something that was missing in my life. I asked for her forgiveness, hoping that she might be able to understand me one day. But when I sent the letter, there was no response. I didn't expect miracles, but as days passed without a word from her, I felt my last hope for reconciliation slipping away. During those days, I began to reflect a lot on what had led me to do what I had done. My feelings for Andrew were not just the result of physical passion, though that certainly played a part. I started to understand that the attraction I felt was tied to something I lacked. It wasn't love so much as a longing for support, for understanding that I couldn't find in my relationship with Justin, or in my life in general. Andrew was someone who understood me, who listened to me when I felt lost and alone. My desire to be close to him came from that need for support. I was looking for something in him that I so desperately lacked, but that support turned out to be false, illusory, destructive. It led me to destroy my family, to lose the trust of those closest to me. I began to realize that before seeking understanding and love from others, I had to learn to find them within myself. I understood that my attempts to fill the emptiness inside had led me to lose everything that mattered. And now I had to start from scratch, finding myself. It wasn't just about returning to life, but about building a new life, one where I didn't have to rely on others to feel my own worth.